Right, so as far as media coverage of what has been going on in Gaza for the last several months has gone, the world has been heavily reliant on the risks taken, their lives on the line and too often lost by both independent journalists and those who work for Al Jazeera. Israel's deliberate targeting of journalists a war crime after all. Western journalists not so keen to be on the ground these days. The days of Kate Adie in a vest and helmet with bombs going off around her long gone. You can't exactly see Laura Koonsberg choosing to do that, can you? But of course their footage, their coverage has been relentlessly exposing, in line with the harrowing footage we've all been seeing on social media, what the reality has been in Gaza for the Gazan people, and has in no small part played a leading role in seeing public opinion shift against Israel, shift against Netanyahu's regime, so the faux accusations of anti-Semitism now fall on deaf ears, seen as the genocidal state it really is at last. Little wonder, therefore, that Netanyahu has now passed a law to ban Al Jazeera. But banning them from Israel is one thing. Banning them from Gaza is another, when they're very much still present there, boots on the ground. And they've vowed that their coverage must continue, and will continue, because the truth must be reported. But could this also hamper the peace process of itself now as well? Right, so Al Jazeera. I've used them as source material for much of my Israel Gaza coverage because it's been amongst the best out there, and how could it not be when their people are on the ground at the scene, risking their lives and sadly losing them in too many cases for the sake of ensuring the truth of the atrocities in Gaza gets out to the wider world. For months it's been clear that Israel had been deliberately targeting journalists in Gaza against international law, protected as they are by that, in order to stop them from reporting, and the only reason any side in any conflict would wish harm upon journalists is if you are doing something you know you shouldn't be doing and do not want it reported. Shielded as Israel has been by too many other countries, too often a blind eye is cast to this, the only accountability being shown coming from the global public observing these incidents and condemning them on social media, all part of turning opinion against Israel, and not without good reason, of course. Now we know Israel have no intentions of stopping this. They are determined that what they are doing is right and just, and they have every right to be doing it because Hamas, but they don't. They're in violation of resolutions and regulations they know they're signed up to. We know all of this by now, as various court cases and other legislation and resolutions of the UN Security Council have shown. So what have they got left now to swing public opinion? Cut off the journalists, stop the reporting. Now, there is no stopping independent journalists reporting, nor ordinary Palestinians continuing to video atrocity. So quite what Israel hoped to achieve in passing a law that bans Al Jazeera really isn't clear. It's just spiteful nonsense against a media outlet they have no control over, and they can't stand that. We know they like to have control because then they can threaten. It was only a few months ago, after all, that Netanyahu was threatening to shut down Israeli news outlet Haaretz for criticising what was happening in Gaza. But when it comes to a foreign aid outlet, apparently he's prepared to go as far as to legislate them into illegality. Netanyahu has taken to Twitter and issued the following message. Al Jazeera has harmed Israel's security, actively participated in the October 7th massacre, and incited against IDF soldiers. It is time to remove the shofar of Hamas from our country. The terrorist channel Al Jazeera will no longer broadcast from Israel. I intend to act immediately in accordance with the new law to stop the channel's activity. I welcome the law promoted by Communications Minister Shlomo Karai with the support of coalition members led by coalition chairman Ophir Katz. Now this law, it has to be said, is temporary. Israel can only ban the media for 45 days at a time, though can be repeatedly enacted. It's also hardly the first time Netanyahu has had beef with the channel and has tried to shut it down. He tried in 2017 when he took to Facebook to rage about how they incite violence. In 2021, in a previous but far less widely reported assault on Gaza, the offices of Al Jazeera and the Associated Press in Gaza City were destroyed. Again, an example of the targeting of the media, having been struck by an Israeli missile as it was then. And we've seen similar instances, attacks on the press and their facilities within Gaza this time around as well. Killing journalists isn't working. Destroying their offices isn't working. So finally Netanyahu is trying a legal route, even though his crackpot law has no basis in fact, not that that seems to ever matter, and actually threatens the peace process as well, leading to speculation this move could be to still further widen this conflict, to draw in the West, and save the Israeli government from all the enemies it is making for itself. We know Israel have long-standing issues with Lebanon and Syria, and they've been dragged into this current unstable climate in the Middle East since, despite Israel attacking Gaza, it has also increased attacks on them. This has been followed by this strike on Iran we've seen in the last week, the destruction of its embassy in Damascus. So now they threaten repercussions. On top of that, you have the Houthis in Yemen still blockading Israeli shipping, along with US and UK shipping too after they attacked Yemen. The Houthis now, it seems, have struck deals with both Russia and China for support in exchange for unimpeded shipping access, and could be attempting to bring other BRICS nations on board as well. Now this attack on Al Jazeera to ban them brings not only another nation's ire to the fore, but actually damages the peace process potentially as well. You see, Al Jazeera are Qatar-based state media. They're partly financed by the Qatari head state, and they're headquartered in the Qatari capital of Doha. State media always have an inbuilt bias towards their own state, which is perfectly logical and understandable. So much like, for example, I wouldn't take any notice of the BBC regarding the British government. They can deny being state-sponsored all they like. Many of us switched BBC News off some time ago for that perfectly valid reason, though. And you might choose not to take notice of Al Jazeera's coverage where it comes to Qatar itself. But calling Al Jazeera harmful to Israel's security, calling them a shofar for Hamas, I had to Google that one. A shofar apparently is a type of horn, so the implication being that Al Jazeera are mouthpieces for Hamas there. And also calling them a terrorist channel. Well, it's not exactly the height of diplomacy, is it? But Israel don't want diplomacy. They want to raze Gaza to the ground and their people with it, and anyone reporting on actions leading to such an end result, where they're enemies of that intent, aren't they? But I don't call that terrorism, I call that exposing genocide, I call that journalism. Making an enemy of Qatar over this is not conducive to a peaceful resolution either, though I have just said that isn't what Netanyahu and his maniac government want, because Qatar, of course, along with Egypt, have been the chief facilitators of talks between Israel and Hamas. So pissing off the Qataris is one way to damage a peaceful resolution if they decide to take no further part in that peace process and decide they're going to take a stand against Israel. And even if they don't do that immediately, if Israel now start, for example, arresting Al Jazeera operatives in Gaza, they are still on the ground there, or carry on killing more of them, I presume the coordination between Al Jazeera and the IDF, which has gone on all this time so far, will now end. And we can easily imagine how that's going to work out for the journalists. The animosity will only grow, and that will be yet one more country Israel can bleat to genocide Joe about, who are being mean to them. Al Jazeera are one of the most globally respected world news reporting outlets going. Israel making yet another enemy of yet another Gulf state you would think is completely counterintuitive. And I've looked at some reporting on this story from other commentators and the like, and some of them are saying how they can't understand how Israel can think or act like this, how against its own interests it must be to annoy their neighbours. And I'm thinking, have you ever read any of the history on any of this? Israel is a Western project. It only has interests in its connections to the West. Its very creation was an affront to many Middle Eastern nations, and its ongoing attacks on the native people to that area, the Arab populations, the people of Gaza, only reinforce that. They've made no efforts to ever properly integrate into the Middle East in any meaningful long-term way. So upsetting Qatar now? Damaging peace talks as a result? I don't imagine for one moment Israel give the slightest damn about that. It's one more country in the Middle East that'll now have more beef with Israel, and Israel will plead for help yet again from the West. Netanyahu wants US, UK, and whoever else's governments are stupid enough to keep believing them to get involved more directly. This is simply the latest attempt at putting pressure on them, in my view, to act in their interests and not the interests of peace. This, of course, all comes at the same time that Israel made that strike on Iran, doing so in a historically world-first manner by directly targeting the centre of Iranian diplomacy in another country, by intentionally targeting their embassy in Syria. It's never been done before. That's a whole new depth of depravity stooped to. And again, all for the purpose of dragging more and more countries into a conflict that's grown beyond Israel's control, Netanyahu needing more and more support that he's not yet getting in the way that he wants, all ultimately to save his own backside and keep him in power. Check out that story here on this video recommendation. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.